In September 1944, as Allied forces drove relentlessly across the Pacific, the remote, jagged speck of coral known as Peleliu was marked for a quick, routine cleanup, a mere footnote in the grand campaign to return to the Philippines. The veteran 1st Marine Division, hardened by the fighting on Guadalcanal, was assured by its commanding general, Major General William Rupertus, that the operation would be a hard-fought quickie over in just 4 days. What transpired, however, was a 74-day descent into a suffocating 115 Fahrenheit hellscape of razor-sharp coral and fortified caves, costing the United States forces over 10,000 casualties. This, then, is the story of the Battle of Peleliu, the unnecessary hell, a military failure of intelligence and command whose horrific human cost served as the first bloody warning of the Japanese doctrine of attrition that would soon be unleashed upon Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The roots of the Peleliu catastrophe lie not on the island itself, but in the high command of the Pacific Theater. By mid-1944, the U.S. island-hopping campaign had punched through the Japanese outer defense perimeter. The immediate objective was the Philippines, General Douglas MacArthur's highly personal and politically charged goal. To secure the right flank of the impending Leyte invasion, Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief, Pacific Ocean Areas, scheduled Operation Stalemate 2, the seizure of the Palau Islands, specifically the airfields on Peleliu and Ongar. It was a seemingly logical logistical step in the war's relentless progression. Yet, a furious, last-minute debate erupted. Admiral William Bull Halsey, commanding the powerful U.S. Third Fleet, had conducted a series of highly effective carrier raids over the Palau and Philippine Islands just weeks before D-Day. His intelligence reported surprisingly little air opposition and deemed the remaining Japanese forces in the Palaus incapable of threatening the Leyte invasion. On September 13, 1944, just 2 days before the assault, Halsey urgently recommended to Nimitz and the Joint Chiefs of Staff that the entire Palau operation be canceled and the troops be redirected to accelerate the Leyte invasion. The strategic justification for Peleliu, he argued, had evaporated. Nimitz faced an agonizing decision. With an immense amphibious task force already at sea, reversing the order would risk confusion, expose the fleet to attack, and, critically, was deemed too late to effectively stop. Nimitz chose to proceed, citing the initial strategic plan and the momentum of the operation. He accepted Halsey's recommendation to advance the Philippine invasion, but the order for the Marines to land on Peleliu stood. The fate of thousands of young Marines and soldiers was thus sealed by a decision of military prudence that tragically failed to grasp the rapidly shifting reality on the ground. The fatal underestimation and the 4-day lie. The American invasion was built on twin pillars of hubris and poor intelligence. Planners viewed Peleliu as a conventional island assault, eliminate the beach defenses, seize the airfield, and mop up the scattered remainder. The island's key terrain feature, the Umurbrogol Mountain, a tangled 5-mile spine of jagged volcanic coral, was dismissed in intelligence briefings as merely low, rolling hills. Aerial photography, obscured by thick jungle canopy, failed to convey the nightmare terrain beneath. The coral was not soil, it was limestone, a substance that defied shovels, absorbed shellfire, and, when broken, created shards that ripped boots and tires alike. This flawed assessment was championed by Major General William Rupertus, commander of the legendary 1st Marine Division. Rupertus, eager to preserve the division's reputation following Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester, promised his superiors the battle would be a quickie. His infamous prediction of 4 days, 5 at the most, trickled down the command chain, fostering a dangerous overconfidence among the Marines, veterans and raw recruits alike, and leading to insufficient planning for the kind of extended, grueling campaign that truly was required. This was the moment the Marines began sailing toward a deception born of poor maps and arrogant assumptions. The new enemy doctrine, Colonel Nakagawa's attrition fortress. While the American command planned for a blitzkrieg, the Japanese were planning for the apocalypse, recognizing that the old defense strategy, fanatical banzai charges and defending the beaches at all costs, was simply a waste of manpower against overwhelming American firepower. They fundamentally changed their doctrine. The new strategy was one of attrition, designed not to win the island, but to inflict such a staggering cost that the American public would be demoralized and sue for a negotiated peace. The architect of this terrifying new model was Colonel Nakagawa, commander of the Japanese 2nd Infantry Regiment. Nakagawa transformed the Umurbrogol Massif into a military marvel, a deep, interlocking fortress. Using the island's natural limestone features and phosphate mines, his engineers blasted and connected over 500 caves, pillboxes, and fortified positions. These underground fortresses featured reverse slope defense. Artillery and mortars were placed on the reverse slopes of the ridges, making them invisible and impervious to naval bombardment. Interlocking fields of fire. Every section of the beach and every forward ravine was pre-registered and covered by hidden machine guns and anti-tank cannons. The honeycomb. Tunnels connected these positions, allowing troops to retreat from one cleared cave only to reappear behind the attacking Americans minutes later. This was a defense built for delay, pain, and death. Nakagawa's strategy was simple. Conserve forces during the pre-invasion shelling, unleash devastating fire on the beaches, then pull the Marines into the Umurbrogol grinder, forcing them to pay for every single yard with blood and specialized ordnance. The Marines were about to meet a foe who would no longer fight like samurai, but like rats in a labyrinth.
Landing into the vortex. At 8:32 a.m. on September 15, 1944, the assault waves, hundreds of armored amphibious tractors, Amtraks, carrying the men of the 1st, 5th, and 7th Marine Regiments, churned across 800 yards of fringing coral reef toward the southwest beaches. For 3 days, naval guns and air attacks had reduced the island to a smoking, pulverized wreck, leading to a pervasive, if tragic, feeling of success among the American command. But as the landing craft ground to a halt on the beaches, the Japanese unveiled Nakagawa's first deadly surprise. Silence had been a trap. From concealed, bomb-proof positions on both the northern and southern flanks, fortified coral promontories known as the Point and Airstrip Ridge, sliding steel doors opened in the cliff faces. A hellish crossfire of 47mm anti-tank guns, 20mm cannons, and heavy machine guns erupted. The beaches, designated white and orange, became an immediate killing zone. Amtraks were blasted apart, erupting in fireballs and scattering Marines into the water and onto the narrow, shell-blasted sand. Landing parties were shredded before they could push 10 yards inland. Within hours, the 1st Marine Division had suffered over 1,100 casualties, including 200 dead, a catastrophic loss rate that instantly shattered General Rupert's 4-day timetable. The battle had begun, not with a landing, but with a massacre. 1:15 to 1:35. The fight for the Point. The worst killing came from the heavily fortified pinnacle on the extreme north flank of White Beach 1, simply known as the Point. This 30-foot-high, jagged coral fortress was the linchpin of the Japanese beach defense, delivering catastrophic infillating fire down the entire length of the landing zone. The mission to neutralize it fell to Captain George P. Hunt's K Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, 3/1. Hunt led a desperate frontal assault against a position impervious to the preliminary bombardment. His men had to fight machine gunners protected by thick steel and concrete pillboxes blasted directly into the base of the coral cliffs. Using flamethrowers, demolition charges, and sheer ferocity, they systematically silenced the emplacements. After a day of hand-to-hand, brutal fighting, K Company seized the pinnacle. But they were now isolated, cut off from the main line, and reduced from 235 men to just 78 survivors. Captain Hunt and his remnants spent the next 30 hours pinned down, fending off 3 furious Japanese counterattacks, including a midnight banzai charge, in a brutal siege that exemplified the courage and horror of the initial beachhead. Taking the point was critical, but the cost revealed the true nature of the fight ahead. The dash for the airfield and the heat of the coral. While the 1st Marines were being immolated on the left flank, the 5th and 7th Marine Regiments charged across the center, driving toward the primary objective, the airfield. By D-Day evening, the 5th Marines, under Colonel Oliver P. Smith, had achieved their objective, seizing the airfield and pushing toward the eastern shore. The strategic goal of neutralizing the Japanese air threat was accomplished within 24 hours. But the victory was hollow. The airfield itself was a flat, open plain, a target-rich environment surrounded by the commanding high ground of the Umurbrogol, which was now filled with Japanese mortars and artillery. The Marines were exposed to constant, observed fire. The physical conditions were as deadly as the enemy. Temperatures soared to 115 Fahrenheit in the blinding tropical sun. The Marines, fighting on ground that was razor-sharp white coral dust, faced acute dehydration. Crucially, their water supply was contaminated, having been stored in empty oil drums, leading to severe illness and further swelling the casualty lists with victims of heat exhaustion. The Marines had their prize, but they held it under a constant rain of mortar fire and in a hellish furnace of coral and heat. The easy part was over. The real battle, the one Rupertus had ignored, was just beginning, for the Umurbrogol loomed.
The assault on Umurbrogol. With the airfield secured, the battle shifted entirely to the rugged central massif, the Umurbrogol Mountains, which the Marines quickly dubbed Bloody Nose Ridge. This labyrinth of jagged, volcanic coral cliffs, steep ravines, and hidden valleys was the center of Colonel Nakagawa's defensive masterpiece. The terrain was impassable to tanks and virtually impervious to artillery. The task of breaking this line fell primarily to the battle-weary 1st Marine Regiment under Colonel Louis Chesty Puller. Puller, a legendary Marine renowned for his aggressive momentum tactics, drove his men head-on into the fortified ridges. The result was a grinding, yard-by-yard ordeal that consumed the regiment. The Japanese had honeycombed the coral with an estimated 500 interlocking caves, many with concrete and steel-reinforced entrances, and connected by a subterranean tunnel system that allowed them to evacuate, reinforce, and deliver fire from unexpected directions. Marines advanced by climbing sheer coral faces, only to be cut down by machine gun fire from a cave above, or shelled by mortars hidden in an adjacent ravine. The temperature, the lack of water, and the inability to dig foxholes in the rock compounded the horror. Within 4 days of fighting, in the Umurbrogol, the 1st Marine Regiment suffered nearly 2,000 casualties, including 311 killed, out of a starting strength of 3,251. It was the highest casualty rate of any Marine regiment in the entire war. The regiment was, in the words of a corps commander, finished. Developing the cave fighting doctrine. The nature of the terrain forced the Marines to abandon traditional infantry tactics and pioneer a brutal new doctrine for cave warfare. The problem was simple. A frontal assault led to certain death, and conventional explosives or shelling merely sealed a few entrances. The effective solution became the highly coordinated flamethrower demolition team, or blowtorch and corkscrew. This tactic involved suppression. Riflemen and automatic weapons operators would lay down continuous, concentrated fire on a cave entrance to keep the defenders' heads down. Close assault. A Marine carrying a flamethrower, often an engineering Marine, would sprint to the entrance and deliver a long, sustained burst of fire, incinerating everything inside or forcing the defenders deeper into the cave system. Sealing. Immediately following the flame, another Marine would rush forward to detonate a large demolition charge, a satchel charge, at the cave mouth, collapsing the entrance and sealing the defenders inside, thus ensuring they could not reoccupy the position. This was a terrifying, close quarters and physically exhausting form of warfare, with the Marines having to drag heavy equipment up steep, jagged slopes while under constant mortar and sniper fire. It was slow, costly, but ultimately the only way to crack the Umurbrogol. Relief and the Army takes over. By September 23rd, 8 days after D-Day, the 1st Marine Regiment was no longer combat effective and was withdrawn from the line. Lieutenant General Roy Geiger, commander of the 3rd Amphibious Corps, realized the battle was far from over and ordered the commitment of the Corps Reserve, the 81st Infantry Division, Army, which had just secured the nearby island of Angar. Starting with the 321st Infantry Regiment, the Army units began to replace the decimated Marine regiments. The Army troops quickly found themselves in the same relentless, attritional fight against the Umurbrogol Pocket. General Rupertus and his staff were relieved of command, with the Army commander, Major General Paul Mueller, assuming control of the ground effort. The relief of the 1st Marine Division took over a week, but the change in command marked a critical shift. The Marines had shattered the Japanese ability to defend the beaches and taken the airfield, but the Army would now take on the responsibility of the Gettysburg of the Pacific, the Umurbrogol Pocket. The battle, predicted to last 4 days, had already lasted 2 weeks. It was only half over.